Hello again, everybody, and welcome to my second mural concept. This is my super speeded through ink work that you're seeing right here. Don't worry about how fast this is going right now. It'll slow down a little bit once we start doing the paint. But this video is actually where I'm reaching sort of an impasse, and I could use your input if you guys are willing. I sped this video up quite a lot in certain spaces because it's about 5 or 6 hours of footage altogether, and I'm trying to decide now whether or not I like keeping all of the footage in but very sped up, or if it would be better to cut out some of the footage and slow the speed down a little bit. So if any of you have firm opinions on that, please let me know. I have such a hard time deciding what to cut, though. What's not interesting to see? I don't know. I think it's all pretty cool. But this one did get pretty fast in places. I'm not sure about how fast it is. But let me know. Let me know what you think. I'm starting this drawing. I started it with a concept sketch, and then I made a nicer sketch here on my watercolor paper, which I then covered over with ink and erased all my original pencil lines. And now I'm starting in with some watercolor. I use, I think it's a Faber-Castell ink pen for this drawing. They're waterproof once they're dry, so you can paint right over them, which is something that I really like. I'm starting this one. I called this mural concept my Celestial Lady concept, for, I guess, obvious reasons, as you'll see as we go along here. So I started out with a lot of light blues, although toward the end it's going to end up much darker, but you gotta start out light, because it's so much easier to go darker than it is to lift that paint back up. Although you can with watercolors, you can lift it back up to an extent, but it will never be quite as light as it could have been if you had just started lighter. See, here's a few seconds here of real-time speed you can notice, so you can see how fast this actually goes. I put this in real time because it's such a delicate little section. I made sure to keep the paint really light here in this section because I knew I wanted a light source to come up there, and I needed to make sure my blue was really light so that it didn't mix too much with the yellow that I was going to put in later. And now we're all speeded up again, getting ready to zoom through these cool triangle things I've got going here. I don't know how many of you might be Star Trek fans, but I'm a very big Star Trek fan, and some of you might recognize some of this triangular circle shapes I've got going here, but it's not a direct riff, but I can see an inspiration there. That sort of imagery was very strong for me when I was growing up, so it does influence some of my artistic choices still, I guess. Now, I never decided this lady should have black hair necessarily. She just sort of ended up having black hair. I thought that's just how she looked in my head, I suppose. This is another section where it's incredibly sped up. I sped through the background because I've already done a few videos where I show you how I do this splotchy, spacey background. I'll see if I can put a link up here in the video right now to another video you can look at if you're interested in a slower version, a more detailed explanation of how I do this background. But I've done it before, and you guys can find it if you need it. So I sped through this part pretty quickly so that I could get to some of the more interesting details here in the center. I just made sure that none of my paint came into my center design. All you have to do is keep the water out of there if you don't want paint in there. That's the best part about watercolors. You can You can just keep the water out of wherever you don't want color, and the color won't be there. Seems simple, but it's hard to remember sometimes. Easy to forget, I suppose. Now I'm starting in with my light source. It looks like you can see that tiny spark starting out there in her hand right there. Now the background of this whole piece was kind of rough overall. It's not a really finely detailed piece. If I ever got the chance to do this sort of design on a large wall, it'd be much more detailed in the end, but the background is one area that I am just not happy with. It didn't turn out how I wanted it. I made the ring a little crooked. You can see as we move along here, it's a little crooked, and those sort of things stand out pretty hard to me, and that was one of my least favorite parts about this whole picture. But I really do like how the stained glass effect that I got on this blue section here, and especially that blue section around her head, ends up having a really lovely sort of stained glass effect that I really appreciated. And although I really like that lovely stained glass effect, it doesn't end up being my favorite part of this whole painting. Excuse my hair there, always popping into frame. I have to remember to put my hair back. I recently cut all my hair off and have a harder time now putting it back than I used to. But yeah, that headpiece ended up looking really cool, but it wasn't my favorite part. One of my favorite parts, you'll see a little later on, is some of the shadowing that I do inside this rib cage is ended up being my favorite part of this piece. But as you can see, I'm just delicately dropping color in there. I wet the whole area around that headpiece, and then I'm just dropping little wisps and spots of color in there to give it a varied tone. You know, you don't want all of your darks and lights being exactly the same when you're going for a stained glassy sort of look like I was going here. You need some variation in that tone, that color value. Now I headed into her face. I haven't decided yet if I like the ink work on her face, or if I should have maybe left that pencil and then just painted it in. Faces are full of so many very soft angles and very subtle light shifts that, I don't know, I think maybe the pen might have ended up looking too harsh. But, oh well, yeah, you learn as you go. That's how anything works. I really liked how her legs turned out, her cross-legged legs right here, but I'm less thrilled with how her arm and shoulder turned out. It's not as obvious, I guess, from this angle that you're looking at it right now, but a little later on in the video we're gonna switch that angle up so you get a more frontal view of what I'm doing here. And her arm and shoulder and the way it rests next to her rib cage, I was trying to leave room for where the rest of her, I guess, meat, her body would be if she wasn't part skeleton like she is. But it ended up looking very awkward, that shoulder and arm area, and I definitely need to work on that proportionally if I ever blow this image up more. But body proportions can be hard, especially if you're not like I was. I wasn't really drawing off of something very much here. I had a couple of reference photos of people sitting cross-legged to get an understanding of where the light would hit. But for obvious reasons, I didn't really have a model to look off of with this skeleton part, so it ended up being a little awkward, a little not proportional, but again, that's how you learn. It's how you move forward, recognizing things that you can improve upon. If you never recognized areas where you could improve, how would you get better? I don't know. Maybe luck. But I don't want to rely completely on luck. There's a little bit of work that goes along with it, so. Oh, I really like the shading on her hand. I thought the shading on her hand ended up looking really good. And one of my favorite parts about this piece was this light source she's got holding down in her hand. One of my favorite parts was adding in the reflected light on her body from where that light source was, because it was such a strange and unusual light source angle compared to a lot of the other pieces I've done that have light sources from the sky, usually up above or to the left and right. And this was a very low undersided that's a terrible term. That's not a real word. From below. It was a nice from below light source, so it was really interesting to kind of decide where I wanted to put that reflected light from that light source, because it's such an unusual perspective. So that was really fun. I enjoyed putting in the little bits of reflected light on her skin. Now I'm just adding in her more of her skin tones. I think were I to do this again, I would add in more colors, a little bit more color variation in her skin tone, but she ended up with some nice shades, good tones going. As a piece of concept art, I want this to give a general idea of where the piece is going, but not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have to be exactly the same as what it would be in a finished product, you understand. Now I'm doing this silken, what this is, I suppose, is a piece of her skin, but not in a horrific way. I've done a few drawings that were kind of horrific, for lack of a better term, but she's pulling away her skin here, not in a horrific way, but as you can look at it, you can see it's like a piece of silk. Like she's tearing away a veil, and that's the veil of her physicality, I suppose, because we're all really, deep down, we're all just part of a greater universe, I suppose. So she's tearing away this silken veil of her physical humanity and becoming something more cosmic, I guess. Now I'm putting in some shadows for her hair. I want to make sure that you can see the depth in the hair. You don't want it to look like it's just drawn on there flat. You want it to look like it's resting around the shape of her head. So you end up with darker shadows of hair next to her neck and on the side of her head, and then lighter strands as you go up toward the top where it would reflect light. Theoretical light, I guess. There wouldn't be too much light coming from the top. There would be a soft light coming from all around her if she was really in space like this, but no direct lights except for the one in her hand. Well, hello, Mr. Puck. I just had a visitor decide to crawl into my lap and make himself at home. It'd be great if I could get him to meow on cue when I said hello. I should teach him that. Can you teach cats to speak? I don't know, I've never tried, but I feel like it might be a futile effort on my part, getting a cat to speak. But I suppose getting back to this painting, it's coming along now. I've got a lot of the skin tones starting in on this, my favorite part now, getting into that light and that reflected light in the little rib cage area. Right now I'm adding some darker blues between the individual rays of light that this light source is giving off. In order for a ray of light to really look like a bright ray of light, it needs some darker contrasting tones around it, or else it just it won't shine. It won't shine as dramatically. Now I had a really interesting time. I had to use a little tiny brush and get all of these little blue spaces in between her ribs where you would see the rest of space through her rib cage, you understand? Although I suppose really you should have been able to see that ring of her headpiece behind her rib cage too, and I didn't think about that. I didn't realize that until just now. I'll have to keep that in mind, I guess, if I ever make this again. You should see that ring in between her rib cage. But oh well. I guess that's a good thing about doing these videos. I get to stand here and watch myself through this process and decide where I can improve. It's a useful tool. It's a useful tool. Now I'm just adding in some color tones to this silken skin that I've got here. You want to make it look rippling. That's how it makes it look like a silky fabric. It needs to ripple with highs and lows, peaks and valleys, highlights and shadows. And that's really anything, but fabric especially is really good to practice if you're having troubles with highlights and shadows and subtler tones like that. I would definitely recommend doing some fabric, because everywhere that fabric is curved up is going to be a very strong highlight, and everywhere that fabric is curved into a wrinkle, you get a nice dark contrast of shadow. So it's a good thing to practice if you're worried about that aspect of your art. Now I'm adding in these delicate little shadings on her face. It's awfully surprising how easily you can make the features of a face change just by adding in a few different shadows or highlights. Because those highlights and those shadows, those are the actual structure of the face. So you add in a little different piece of shadow and it's a whole different face. So you have to watch that, especially if you're trying to recreate an actual person. It wasn't so important for me here because this isn't a real person. This is a person I made up. So I could really do anything I wanted with her face, which was kind of liberating, a little fun. And it was at this point then that I decided to add in a little bit more, I suppose, variation in this back ring here. I didn't line them up as precisely as I would have if I had planned this from the beginning. I would have probably done some pencil lines in there, lined it up a little bit nicer. So, but I do like the idea of it. I do like the added rays, but I would have marked them in a little cleaner, I think. Here I'm speeding through the background again. I'm just adding in some more splotches, different colors, different color shifts. I wanted it to be a little warmer in that background because I did sort of a warm background and then a cooler tone in that middle ring, and then going into a yellower, again, warm tone, more warm tone for that central area. I wanted that sort of an Oreo sandwich of warm and cool tones there. I liked the contrast that it gave me. But yeah, splotchy backgrounds, like I said, are something I've done before, and you can look up those videos. And now I'm just putting a little bit of cover. See, I put in some stars, but I didn't want to get stars on my main lady here, so I put in a folded up envelope and an ice cream bucket lid with a little loop of tape on it so I could pick it up easy over top of my main subject here. And then I diluted a little bit of white acrylic, which is normally what I use, and got an old toothbrush that I use for stars, and I just splattered some stars in there. I wanted to make sure to get a lot of stars on this ring, because this ring honestly shouldn't have been drawn in probably like it was. You see how it's crooked? You can see from this angle that ring. Ugh, not super happy with this background, but I suppose I could go back and fix it if I really wanted to. But the ring should be made up completely of spots, really. It shouldn't have been painted in originally much at all, but it's only the background. It's only the background. I say, trying to convince myself that it's okay. It's okay not to have a perfect thing. Nothing is perfect. Just keep reminding yourself. And now I decided this was originally just going to be a white ring, but I felt like that looked too plain compared to the intricacy of the rest of this piece. And I wanted there to still be sort of a white ring, so I left that interior one more of a solid color later on, but I thought this ring definitely needed something, so I, at the last minute, decided to make it into sort of a crescent moon. In the end here, I ended up with like a moon that's sort of being eclipsed by some other body, maybe Earth. I don't know. Just some other body being eclipsed by eclipsing this moon, I suppose. And moon painting in watercolor is really fun because you can just work with one main color, just your diluted gray, and just add in these little splotches. You get your whole moon wet so that the splotches spread out really smoothly. And then you just add really light splotches first, and you just darken it up slowly so you get more of this cratery moon effect. Honestly, doing a moon has become one of my favorite things to paint because it's just so much fun. It's so easy. Look at those splotches. Maybe I should paint like a big broken moon. That would be cool. Have any of you ever seen Assassination Classroom? I'm not sure if I could pronounce it correctly in Japanese because it's a Japanese anime. I like all sorts of stuff, you guys. I don't know if I could pronounce it in Japanese. I think it's like Ansatsu Kyuchitsu. I think that's, a little close. It's probably not great, but my pronunciation isn't the best. But anyways, it's Assassination Classroom, and this crazy octopus monster just shatters the moon, and it's such a striking image. I wonder if I could paint a picture of a big broken moon. That would be kind of cool. I'll have to keep that in my thought bank, I guess. And now I'm just starting to add some really cool darks into my main blue areas with this ring. I'm adding into the stained glass look of the center ring with some more squiggles and some more dark contrasting blue. And I'm going to start just really darkening up the middle blue ring. I want to give it some real dimension on my cool triangle. My cool bronze triangle got a little bit more shading in there too. But it's definitely that blue ring that gets the most darkening up. I really wanted that to dramatically pop out or sink into that moon, almost like a hole, you know? That broken moon idea again, I guess. I guess I'm gonna have to do that. Just adding in some more splotches to that moon. You really want I wanted them to fade into each other to make it look like it was a three-dimensional object, I suppose, more than just a flat ring. Adding in some more shadows. You see how when I add some more shadows to that leg, then the yellow highlight pops out so much more dramatically once you start adding in those shadows. And that's always kind of magical to see. It looks so much more like a reflection of light once those darker shadows are put in there. I had a devil of a time. That's an old-fashioned turn of phrase. I did have a hard time, though, trying to figure out how to light her face from below like that. I could have looked up. I should have taken a picture of myself holding a flashlight or something like that so that I could get a better idea of how that light would reflect from that angle. Maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll do that just for fun. Look at her, she's looking really good. She's looking really good. I got some more work in this rib cage to go. Here we go with my favorite rib cage moments. Oh, good, I zoomed in. I was hoping I remembered to zoom in for that. Now I'm adding in some very small shadows around the edges of each one of these ribs and each one of these bones and vertebra so that it looks less like a drawing of a skeleton and more like an actual bone. You know, you have to put that three-dimensionality in there. It's just gonna look flat. So I started by adding in my shadows around the bone, and then I'm gonna fill in the shadow of the back of the rib. See, there it is. That's my favorite part, that you can see through the openings of the front of the rib. And I think that little detail, just that little detail, really helps bring the three-dimensionality of the rib cage to the forefront. And I made sure to make those shadows in the back of the rib. I made sure to make them really, really light to start out with, because it's easier to change it if you make a line that doesn't look quite right, if you start out really, really light. And once I got that really light line down, then I can go through and start darkening up the blues in between each rib while still maintaining, you know, that obvious backwards shadow of a rib. You can always go darker, you guys. You can always go darker, so start light. It's one of the ways to get it's one of the easiest ways to get a product in the end that you can be happy with, is by starting really light and then just darkening up when you're sure that your positioning is right. It's where you want it to be. And then we're just adding in these darker contrasts to make this rib cage really pop out. You don't want the background to be the same tone as the ribs themselves, or else the ribs won't stand out. You need that dark contrast all around the rib bones. Gosh, I love those. I love those ribs behind the front ribs. I don't know why, it's just, I don't know. It's just really cool. So cool looking. And now I'm highlighting these rays again a little more. We want these light rays to look bright and shiny. Just little detail work here. This is my tiniest watercolor brush. I have a 2, a 5, and a 12, and I can never remember which order it is that goes small to large, but I'm pretty sure this would be a 2. My smallest watercolor brush, I think, is a number 2. Now we're back out zoomed here. I'm going to do some more detail work to the overall piece. I decided to recess this circle here, this main circle that I wanted to leave a more solid color. I decided to give it this really cool recessed look, almost as if it was melting over that triangle that I've got right down there. And I think that ended up looking really cool. I like that brighter highlight where the circle is going over the triangle. I think that ended up looking neat. And now I'm just making sure to add my cast shadows of her main body on the ribs. That's another tiny little detail that's very important. Make sure to always add in the cast shadows of whatever object is casting a shadow over another object. If you've got something like this rib cage that's recessed into her body compared to the top of her skin, then that top of her skin is going to cast a shadow over the top of that rib cage. It's little details like that that really make a piece pop. And here's what I was talking about earlier about darkening up that circle there. I wanted that nice and dark. So we're just adding in one more layer. That's what, with watercolors, it's always one more layer. You can make a watercolor piece like this out of dozens and dozens of layers. I think this piece probably, I could go back and count, but it's at least 20 layers, this piece. Easily 20 layers, because you can just add, I love adding really translucent layers over and over and over again. I feel like it gives it a deep look, a really rich color. So that's my technique, I guess. Very translucent layers over and over again. Now I'm just adding in some color tones to these spikes on her headpiece. I wanted to make sure they looked three-dimensional as well. Every single object should have more than one tone on it. If you don't want your drawing, if you're not going for a flat style, you should always have more than one tone in every little object. Just adding in, I thought I made this a little darker. And I had accidentally made this shadow here on this top left point of her headpiece. That was a complete accident. I smeared some paint and it gave it this triangular shadow that ended up looking a lot like that point was casting a shadow on my white thing. So I decided to double down on that and make another shadow over over the other, underneath the other point of her headdress, as if that light source was casting those points in shadow against the ring behind it. And that ended up looking pretty cool, even though it was a complete accident. I think it ended up looking pretty cool. I think I'd be more careful about the angle of the shadow if I were to do it on purpose again. I had a terrible time trying to get the color for her mouth right. I kept making it far too red and having to tone it down a little bit. A little more of a purpley tone in there to make it match her lovely golden skin tone a little bit more. And that looks about it. There's the finished product right there. Looking nice. My celestial lady. I, for one, think this would look amazing blown up huge on a wall and painted on a wall. That would be pretty amazing. If you think so too, then go ahead and like this video and maybe subscribe if you feel the need. I would appreciate it. I think at this point I have 12 subscribers, so the more the merrier, you guys. I hope to see you in my next video, and I hope you like this one. Well, goodbye. Goodbye.